The sun had barely risen over the sprawling kingdom of Lilith, casting golden hues over the palace's gleaming spires. Aveline wiped the sweat from her brow as she carried a silver tray laden with bread, fruit, and cheese through the echoing halls of the palace. The servants' quarters had long since stirred to life, and the sounds of hurried footsteps and muted whispers filled the air. For Aveline, this morning was no different from the countless others she'd spent working as a maid since she was a child. She had no memory of her life before the palace, only fragmented dreams of a distant past that slipped through her fingers like sand, quickly. Aveline. The prince's breakfast must be perfect today, scolded Madame Irma, the head of the servants, as she bustled past. Yes, madam, Aveline replied, her voice steady despite her growing anxiety. The prince's chambers were at the far end of the palace, a place where few servants were permitted to linger. Balancing the tray, she climbed the grand staircase, marveling at the opulence around her. The walls were adorned with tapestries of ancient battles, and chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, their crystals catching the morning light. Aveline often felt out of place here, as if the grandeur mocked her simplicity. She reached the prince's quarters and hesitated before the towering doors. Taking a deep breath, she knocked softly. Enter, a voice commanded. Aveline pushed open the heavy doors and stepped inside. Prince Kael stood by the window, dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers. He was gazing out over the gardens, his expression unreadable. Your breakfast, Your Highness, Aveline said, bowing slightly as she placed the tray on a small table by the window. Kael turned to look at her, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers. There was something about his gaze that always unsettled her, as if he could see through the walls she had carefully built around her heart. You're new, he said, though it was more of an observation than a question. I've been here for several years, Your Highness, Aveline replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Kael tilted his head, studying her. You're different from the others. Aveline's cheeks flushed, and she quickly lowered her gaze. I only wish to serve, Your Highness. He didn't respond immediately, but as she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. What's your name? Aveline, Your Highness. Thank you, Aveline. The unexpected kindness in his tone caught her off guard. She nodded and hurried out of the room, her heart racing. Back in the servants' quarters, Aveline was greeted by her friend, Lila, a fellow maid with a penchant for gossip. Well, did you see him? Lila asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. I delivered his breakfast, Aveline said, attempting to sound nonchalant. And nothing. He asked my name, that's all. Lila gasped. The prince never asks for anyone's name. Do you know what this means? That he's polite? Lila rolled her eyes. It means he noticed you. Imagine, Aveline, the maid who caught the prince's attention. Aveline laughed, shaking her head. You have too much imagination. Lila. I'm just a maid. But as she went about her duties that day, Aveline couldn't shake the memory of Prince Kael's gaze. There had been something in his eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or recognition. That night, as she lay on her narrow cot, Aveline clutched the small locket she always wore around her neck. It was the only link to her past, a simple piece of jewelry engraved with a crest she didn't recognize. Who am I? She whispered into the darkness, her voice trembling. The locket felt warm in her hand, as if it held answers she couldn't yet comprehend. The following days passed in a blur of routine, but Aveline couldn't escape the prince's lingering gaze in her mind. She continued her duties, scrubbing floors and polishing silver, yet her thoughts were a storm of questions. Why had Prince Kael asked her name? What was it about her that had drawn his attention? Meanwhile, in the opulent halls of the palace, Prince Kael found himself equally distracted. The young woman who had brought his breakfast wasn't like the other servants. There was something hauntingly familiar about her, a quiet strength and grace that he couldn't place. One afternoon, Kael walked through the palace gardens, seeking solace among the blooming roses and cascading fountains. He paused near a marble bench where a group of maids were trimming hedges. Among them was Aveline. She didn't notice him at first, her focus entirely on the task at hand. Her sleeves were rolled up, revealing slender arms dusted with dirt, yet her movements were precise and purposeful. "Miss Aveline," Kael said, his voice cutting through the gentle rustle of leaves. Aveline startled, nearly dropping her shears. She turned to face him, bowing quickly. "Your Highness." Kael gestured for her to rise. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "You didn't," she replied, though her heart was racing. He studied her for a moment, his gaze as intense as ever. "Do you often work in the gardens?" "Yes, Your Highness. I enjoy it." "Why?" Aveline hesitated. "The plants don't expect much. Just care, sunlight, and water. In return, they thrive." Kael smiled faintly. A simple but profound philosophy. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps. Madame Irma appeared, her expression a mixture of panic and disapproval. "Your Highness." "Forgive the intrusion," she said, bowing deeply. "Aveline, return to your duties immediately." Aveline nodded, avoiding Kael's eyes as she hurried away. Kael watched her leave, a frown creasing his brow. There was something about her that stirred questions he couldn't ignore. Aveline's dreams were vivid and unsettling. She found herself standing in a grand hall, adorned with banners bearing a crest she didn't recognize, a golden phoenix rising from flames. Voices echoed around her, urgent and sorrowful. "You must go, my child," a woman's voice pleaded. "But why?" Aveline heard herself ask, though the words felt foreign on her tongue. Before the woman could answer, the dream dissolved into darkness. Aveline woke with a start, her heart pounding. The locket around her neck felt unusually heavy. She held it up to the moonlight streaming through the window, tracing the engraving with her fingers. "The phoenix," she whispered. The image from her dream matched the crest on her locket. But what did it mean? Kael's curiosity about Aveline grew into obsession. He began discreetly asking about her among the palace staff, learning that she had arrived as an orphan years ago with no memory of her past. One evening, as he examined the palace archives, a dusty scroll caught his eye. It was a record of alliances and rivalries with neighboring kingdoms. One entry, in particular, stood out: the kingdom of Aurelia. Aurelia had been Lyrith's fiercest rival before its sudden collapse 15 years ago. Its royal family had been presumed dead after a violent coup, but rumors persisted that the youngest princess had escaped. Kael's pulse quickened as he pieced together the fragments of the story. Could Aveline be connected to Aurelia's lost royal line? The next morning, Kael requested a private audience with Aveline. She arrived at his chambers, her nerves evident in the way she fidgeted with her apron. "You sent for me, Your Highness." Kael gestured for her to sit. "Yes. I wanted to speak with you about your past." Aveline froze. "My past? There's nothing to tell. I've been here for as long as I can remember." He leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. "Do you recognize this?" From his pocket, he produced a sketch of the phoenix crest. Aveline gasped, her hand flying to her locket. This is on my locket," she whispered. Kael nodded. "It's the symbol of Aurelia, a kingdom that fell many years ago. Their youngest princess disappeared during the coup. I believe you might be her." The room fell silent as Aveline processed his words. Her mind raced with memories of her dream, the crest, and the voices. Could it be true? But how could I be a princess? She asked, her voice trembling. "I'm just a maid." "You're more than that," Kael said firmly. "And if I'm right, your identity could change everything, for both our kingdoms." Aveline left the prince's chambers with her heart pounding. Could she truly be the lost princess of Aurelia? The thought was overwhelming. Her life as a palace maid had been simple, if not easy. The idea of belonging to royalty felt alien. Yet a part of her couldn't dismiss the possibility. She retreated to her quarters, her locket clutched tightly in her hand. For years, it had been her only connection to a past she couldn't remember. Now, it seemed to hold the key to a destiny far greater than she could have imagined. That night, Aveline approached the oldest maid in the palace, Greta, who had always been kind to her. She began hesitantly, "Do you know anything about the kingdom of Aurelia?" Greta's face darkened. "Aurelia, that name brings only sorrow. It was a prosperous kingdom, but jealousy and betrayal destroyed it." "Why do you ask?" Aveline hesitated but decided to share her suspicions. Greta listened intently, her expression shifting from surprise to wonder. "Child," Greta said, her voice trembling, "if what you say is true, then you must be careful. The fall of Aurelia wasn't just the work of enemies outside the kingdom. There were traitors within. Those who betrayed your family might still be alive, and they won't want you reclaiming your place." Meanwhile, Prince Kael was deep in conversation with his trusted advisor, Lord Cedric. He recounted everything he had discovered about Aveline. "You realize what this means, Your Highness?" Cedric said, his voice low. "If she truly is the princess of Aurelia, her presence here could ignite old tensions. Not everyone would welcome her return." "I know the risks," Kael replied, his jaw set. "But if we unite our kingdoms, we could bring an end to the rivalries that have plagued us for generations." Cedric nodded reluctantly. "Then we must proceed cautiously. First, we need proof of her identity. Without it, we'll be dismissed as dreamers, or worse, conspirators." Kael agreed and began devising a plan to uncover the truth. The following week, Kael and Aveline ventured to the palace archives under the cover of night. They sifted through ancient scrolls and documents, searching for any mention of Aurelia's royal family. After hours of searching, Kael unearthed a portrait depicting Aurelia's royal court. At the center stood a regal couple, their hands resting on the shoulders of 3 children. Aveline stared at the painting, her breath catching. The youngest child, a girl of about 5, bore a striking resemblance to her. "It's you," Kael said softly, tears welled in Aveline's eyes. "I don't remember them," she whispered, her voice breaking. "How could I forget my own family?" Kael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll uncover the truth together. You're not alone in this." Word of Aveline's possible identity began to spread, despite their efforts to keep it secret. Whispers echoed through the palace halls, And not all were friendly. Among those who heard the rumors was Lord Elric, a powerful noble with ties to the conspirators who had orchestrated Aurelia's fall. Elric's eyes narrowed as he learned of the maid's connection to the Lost Kingdom. If that girl truly is the princess, he muttered to himself, she could ruin everything we've built. Elric wasted no time. He sent word to his allies, instructing them to eliminate Aveline. Before her identity could be confirmed, one evening, as Aveline walked through the palace gardens, she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she saw a shadowy figure emerge from the darkness. Who's there? She called, her voice trembling. The figure lunged, a blade glinting in the moonlight. Aveline screamed, stumbling backward, but before the attacker could strike, Kael appeared, sword drawn. Their blades clashed, the sound ringing through the night. Kael fought with fierce determination, protecting Aveline as though his own life depended on it. The attacker fled, but not before Kael managed to wound him. You're safe now, Kael said, pulling Aveline into his arms. Tears streamed down her face as she clung to him. Why would someone want to hurt me? Because you're a threat, he replied grimly. But I won't let anyone harm you. I promise. The attack shook Aveline to her core. The safety she had once felt within the palace walls was gone, replaced by a constant unease. Prince Kael, however, grew more determined than ever to protect her and uncover the truth of her lineage. The injured attacker had left behind a clue, a medallion bearing a crest neither Kael nor Aveline recognized. Kael summoned his most trusted advisors and scholars to identify its origin. It's the sigil of the Blackthorn Syndicate, Lord Cedric explained gravely. A secretive group known for their allegiance to powerful, corrupt lords. If they're targeting her, it means someone with significant influence sees her as a threat. Then we need to find out who's behind this, Kael said. In the days following the attack, Aveline received an unexpected visitor. Lady Ilara, a noblewoman known for her wisdom and compassion, came to her quarters under the pretense of delivering fresh linens. Once they were alone, Ilara spoke in hushed tones. You are more important than you realize, my dear. There are those who wish to see you fall, but there are also those who would stand with you. Aveline's eyes widened. You know who I am? Ilara nodded. I served your mother, Queen Seraphina, long ago. You have her kindness and resilience. When I saw you, I suspected the truth. The locket confirms it. Aveline's heart raced. Why haven't you told anyone? Because revealing your identity before the right moment would put you in even greater danger, Ilara said. But know this, you are not alone. Trust Prince Kael, he will fight for you as your father once fought for your kingdom. Kael's investigation led him to confront Lord Elric, whose name had surfaced in connection with the Blackthorn Syndicate. Elric, however, was cunning and deflected suspicion with ease. My prince, Elric said smoothly, I would never associate with such vile criminals. If someone is targeting the young maid, it is because they fear your growing alliance with her. Kael studied him carefully, his instincts warning him that Elric was not to be trusted. But without proof, he couldn't act against him. Returning to Aveline, Kael found her seated by the window, gazing at the night sky. Do you ever wonder what your family was like? He asked gently. Every day, she admitted. I don't remember their faces, their voices, but I feel them here. She placed a hand over her heart. Kael took her hand in his. You're stronger than you know. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. As Kael and Aveline worked to piece together her past, Lord Elric plotted in the shadows. He convened with his allies, including a disloyal palace guard named Rowan. "Make no mistake," Elric growled, "the girl must not live to claim her throne. If she does, everything we've worked for will crumble." Rowan hesitated. "But the prince. He seems to care for her deeply. He'll stop at nothing to protect her." "Then we'll have to ensure he's too distracted to intervene," Elric replied, a sinister smile spreading across his face. Kael and Aveline's bond deepened as they spent more time together. He taught her self-defense, insisting she be prepared for any danger. One day, during a practice session, Aveline managed to disarm him. "You're a quick learner," Kael said with a laugh, impressed. "Maybe I was a warrior in another life," she teased, a rare smile lighting up her face. In that moment, Kael realized just how much she meant to him. She wasn't just a potential ally or a mystery to solve, she was someone he couldn't imagine his life without. Aveline's growing confidence was put to the test when Rowan lured her into a trap. Under the guise of delivering a message from Kael, he led her to an abandoned wing of the palace. "You shouldn't have come here," he said coldly, drawing a blade. Aveline's heart raced. "Why are you doing this?" "You threaten powerful men," Rowan replied. "And I've been well paid to ensure you never see the light of day again." But Aveline wasn't alone. Kael, suspecting foul play, had followed her. He burst into the room just as Rowan raised his weapon. The ensuing fight was fierce. But Kael's skill and determination won out. Rowan was captured, and under interrogation, he confessed to working for Lord Elric. With Rowan's confession, Kael finally had the evidence he needed to confront Lord Elric. The traitor was arrested, and his conspiracy unraveled, revealing the depth of his betrayal. As the truth came to light, Aveline's identity as the lost princess of Aurelia was officially confirmed. The people of both kingdoms rallied around her, inspired by her courage and resilience. Aveline's official recognition as the lost princess sent ripples through both kingdoms. Crowds gathered in the palace courtyard, eager to catch a glimpse of the girl who had lived among them unnoticed, only to emerge as royalty. But with her newfound identity came overwhelming responsibility. Aveline struggled to reconcile her humble upbringing with her royal lineage. "Do you think I'm ready for this?" she asked Kael during one of their late-night walks through the palace gardens. "You're more than ready," he assured her. "Your strength comes from your experiences, not your title. That's what makes you a true leader." His words gave her comfort. But the looming threat of the Blackthorn Syndicate and their mysterious benefactors kept her on edge. Aveline's coronation as the rightful princess of Aurelia was set to take place in a week, but tensions remained high. The kings of both kingdoms, eager to solidify their alliance, worked tirelessly to draft a treaty that would unite their people. Prince Kael played a pivotal role in these discussions, advocating for Aveline's vision of equality and compassion. "She represents the best of both worlds," Kael argued during a heated debate. "We cannot let the mistakes of the past dictate our future." His words won over even the most skeptical nobles, paving the way for a historic agreement. On the eve of Aveline's coronation, the Blackthorn Syndicate launched a final, desperate attack. Their forces infiltrated the palace under cover of darkness, intent on kidnapping Aveline and derailing the alliance. Aveline, however, was prepared. With Kael's training and her own determination, she led a group of loyal guards to defend the palace. The battle was fierce, with swords clashing and cries echoing through the halls. Aveline faced one of the syndicate's leaders, a towering figure shrouded in black, You don't belong here, he sneered. You're nothing but a pretender. Aveline held her ground. I've fought harder to stand here than you could ever imagine. This is my home, and I'll protect it with everything I have. With Kael at her side, she defeated the attackers, forcing the syndicate to retreat. The day of the coronation dawned bright and clear. Aveline stood before the gathered crowd, her heart pounding as the crown was placed on her head. You've earned this, Kael whispered as he stood beside her. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked out over the sea of faces. She wasn't just the lost princess anymore, she was a symbol of hope and unity. In her speech, she vowed to use her position to bring peace and prosperity to both kingdoms. We are stronger together, she declared. No matter where we come from, our shared humanity binds us. Let this day mark a new beginning for us all. With the alliance secured and her position solidified, Aveline turned her attention to matters of the heart. Kael had been her unwavering support through every trial, and her feelings for him had deepened into something undeniable. One evening, as they walked along the palace walls, Kael took her hand. Aveline, I've stood by you as your friend, your ally, and your protector. But I want to stand by you as something more, for the rest of our lives. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she nodded. I've always felt safe with you, Kael. You're my heart, you're my love, you're my home. Their love was celebrated with a royal wedding that united the kingdoms even further, solidifying their legacy as leaders who prioritized love, unity, and justice.
Thank you for watching that interesting story on The Lost Princess. Please do well to like, comment, and subscribe. Watch out for the next story coming your way live from Echoes of Tales. Thank you.